Hello, today we're going to be finding the missing angle. And we're going to take you to a little bit of memory lane. An inverse function is a function that undoes a given function. You already are familiar with some functions that and their inverses. So for example, if you have x minus 3 equals 10, you know that the minus gets undone with the plus. So you're going to do plus 3 on both sides, and then you're going to end up with x equals 13. So notice that the plus undoes the subtraction and subtraction undoes the plus. When you multiply, 2 times x is equal to 14. Well, to undo this multiplication, you're going to divide on both sides. And so those get canceled, and x is equal to 7. So these two undo each other. And then when you have the square root and the x to the second power, then they undo each other. So if you have x squared equals 25, to undo the square, you have to take the square root on both sides. And notice that the 2 gets canceled by the square root, so you get x is equal to plus or minus 5. So trig functions are the same. So if you have the sine, the cosine, and the tangent, they also have another function that undoes them. And we use the inverse to find the angles. To find angles. So if we have the arc sine, that's the same thing as the sine inverse or inverse sine. They undo it so that we can find the angle. Arc cosine is the same thing as the cosine inverse, and the arc tangent is the same thing as the inverse tangent. So we're going to find the missing angle using inverse functions, and we're going to round the answer to the nearest degree. So we have this triangle right here. The first thing we do is label. So we're talking about that angle. This is the hypotenuse, and this is the adjacent. So then for this one, we're going to first think, which trig ratio should we use? Well, which ones do we have? Well, we have the sine, which is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. We know the adjacent and hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse leads us to use cosine of x. So we're going to use the cosine of x is equal to 10 over 11. And so now we have to find the inverse to find for the angle x. So that's your angle right there. So we have to use inverse. So we're going to have x is equal to cosine inverse of 10 over 11. Okay, so if we use the graphing calculator, the TI-84, we got to make sure our mode is in degree, and this time this one's not, so I have to go down and press enter on degree. And so I'm going to use the cosine inverse, so it is using the blue button and the cosine, and we're going to put 10 divided by 11, which is equal to 24.6. That's going to round up to 25 because we want to round to the nearest. So x is approximately 25 degrees, or you can say 25 degrees. Okay, let's move on to this one. First, we label the triangle, so we're finding that x. This is the hypotenuse, and this is the opposite. So again, we're going to think, which trig ratio should we use? Well, let's see which ones do we have. We have the sine, the cosine, and the tangent. We want opposite and hypotenuse. Well, opposite and hypotenuse is the sine. So we're going to do the sine of x is equal to 15 over 17. So we're talking about the angle x, so we have to use the inverse. X is equal to sine inverse of 15 over 17. Now I'm going to use decimals. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to go to my functions, and sine inverse is right there, and I'm going to have 15 over 17. Now, my calculator is already in degrees, but where do you get it? You go over here where the little tool sign is at, and you go all the way down, and degrees is already highlighted for me because I've been using it today. So now this is going to round out to 62 degrees. So we're going to say that x is approximately 62 degrees, or we can say 62 degrees. Okay, moving on. So now on the third triangle, the first thing that you do, that's the angle that we want. We know the adjacent side and we know the opposite side. So again, we're gonna think, which trig ratio should we use? Well, let's come over here and see which one has adjacent and opposite. Oh, opposite and adjacent, so we're gonna use the tangent. So we're gonna have the tangent of x is equal to opposite over adjacent. Now remember, to solve for x, we gotta do the inverse. So x is equal to the tangent inverse of 8 over 5. So I'm going to use my decimals over here, clear up what I had, make sure that your mode is in degrees. So I'm going to go functions, tangent inverse. Since I've been using this all day, I know that my mode is in degrees. 8 divided by 5, 8 divided by 5, and it's going to be 57.99. So it's going to round up to 58. So x is approximately 58 degrees. Or you can say 58 with the word degrees. Okay. Now the last one, you have all three sides, but let's label them. This is the hypotenuse, this is the opposite, this is the adjacent. And here you don't have to think, you just pick one because you know all three sides. So because sine is the first one, I'm just going to use opposite over hypotenuse. So I'm going to use sine of question mark, because that's my angle that I need to know, is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. And so to find the angle, the question mark angle, that's the sine inverse of 72 over 97. We're going to go over here to my decimals. One more time, I'm going to remind you that you have to be in degrees. Once you put in degrees, you should be able to use it for all of these problems. So I'm going to use sine inverse. So go to function, sine inverse, and you're going to do 72 divided by 97. And it's going to be 47.9, which rounds up to 48. So x, or actually question mark, is approximately 48 degrees, or 48 degrees in words. So make sure you go and do your exit ticket today. Bye-bye.